They let me into the gallery because I was old enough to remember the surrender, and harmless enough that nobody thought I'd cause trouble in the retelling. 70 years is a long time to sit on the winning side of a war, even when you weren't the one who fought it. I had covered the cessation surrender as a young correspondent, standing in a colder, smaller room than this one, watching a human delegation sign away a war nobody on our side had wanted to lose. I never expected to be back for the sequel. The cessation war ended the way most border wars end for the smaller side, badly, and then quietly. Earth's outer colony at Calder's Reach took the brunt of it. 3 years of siege, a surrender brokered by exhausted men, and a peace that left the Reach a tributary world under Corvi supervision. The Imperium's own histories closed the file there. Earth itself, the homeworld, was recorded in the Corvi archive as a diminished, non-expansionary remnant, a species that had spent its strength on one war and never recovered the will or the means to fight another. 70 years of silence from the homeworld had only confirmed the entry. Visiting trade delegations from 3 other client species had cited the file approvingly over the decades. The way you cite a settled fact you no longer need to check. Nobody in the High Senate had reason to think otherwise. Nobody had looked very hard. The Senate chamber on the day of the Calder Accord was built to make smallness visible. Tiered seating climbed in a slow curve around a sunken floor, packed with delegates in long ceremonial drapes, their elongated heads tilted forward in the particular attentiveness Corvi reserved for matters already decided. Daylight came down through a vast glass dome overhead, pale and clean, the kind of light that made everything underneath it look procedural rather than cruel. First speaker, Ordune Kale, presided from the high dais, flanked by aides who hadn't been born when the cessation war ended. He read the terms of the accord, the way a man reads a weather report, accurate, unhurried, certain no one was going to argue with the sky. The accord itself was simple, which was its own kind of insult. Calder's Reach would be formally annexed, its nominal sovereignty dissolved, its tribute schedule extended in perpetuity, its remaining defense assets, 3 patrol craft and a depot of small arms, surrendered for cataloging. There was a clause about disarmament that the Senate's legal aide read aloud with a faint, polite smile, because there was almost nothing left to disarm. The accord did not invite negotiation, it invited signature. First Speaker Kale said as much, plainly, near the end of his reading. There is nothing left of Earth to negotiate for. Commissioner Morella Voss sat at the petitioner's table below the dais, in a plain gray coat with no insignia, and said nothing while he read. She had been Calder's Reach's appointed speaker for 6 years, long enough that the Senate's clerks had stopped bothering to look up when she entered a room. She didn't object to a single clause. She didn't ask for an adjournment, or a translation, or a moment to confer with anyone. When First Speaker Kale finished and asked, as protocol required, whether the petitioner had anything to add before the accord was entered into record, she looked at him for a moment and said only, "We've read it." It was the kind of answer the chamber liked. A ripple of satisfaction moved through the tiers. Not laughter. Corvi don't laugh the way we do, but something close to it. A settling of shoulders. A small collective exhale. Total compliance. No theater. No appeal to sentiment. Easiest annexation in the Senate's modern record, someone behind me murmured to a colleague, and meant it as praise. Voss signed the accord with a stylus the clerk handed her, in 11 seconds, without reading it again. She set the stylus down and folded her hands and waited, the way a woman waits for a train she already knows is coming. For perhaps 90 seconds, nothing happened, and the chamber enjoyed it. Aides began gathering data slates. A junior senator 2 rows down was already composing, out loud, the language he'd use for his constituency report. First Speaker Kale allowed himself the smallest exhale of a man closing a long file. I remember thinking that this was the whole of it, that I'd come a very long way to watch a formality, and that the only story here was an old one, finished decades ago, finally filed away. Then an aide at the censor station near the dais stood up too fast, said something low to her superior, and the superior didn't sit back down. Word moved through the chamber the way cold moves through a room, not with noise, but with a change in everyone's posture at once. I looked up, because everyone else had, and saw that the daylight through the dome had changed shape. It wasn't cloud. The pale sky above the glass had begun to fill, slowly and then less slowly, with shapes too regular to be weather. Long, dark hulls resolving out of the bright haze, dozens becoming hundreds, arranging themselves with the unhurried precision of something that had rehearsed this on an empty stretch of sky for years, before anyone was meant to see it. The holographic displays along the chamber walls woke up on their own, throwing unfamiliar warship silhouettes across cyan readouts that no one in the room had keyed in. Fleet inventories scrolling past faster than any aide could read them aloud. Several senators stood without seeming to decide to. A few reached for nothing in particular, the way hands do when there's nothing useful left to hold. First Speaker Kale's hand, still resting on the closed accord, didn't move. He turned to Voss and demanded to know what this was. A violation, he said. A breach of the very terms she had just signed. And did she understand what the Imperium did to enclaves that broke faith at the signing table? It was the first time in 6 years I'd heard him raise his voice in that chamber. And even raised, it came out thin against the size of what was now visible through the dome. Voss didn't stand. She didn't raise her voice to match his. She said, "The accord covers Calder's Reach. Read it again. It says nothing about Earth." That was all. No second sentence followed it. No explanation offered to soften the room into understanding faster. She let the silence do the rest of the work, the way she'd let her silence do the work for the entire reading. It took the chamber longer than it should have to understand what she meant, because understanding it meant admitting how badly the archive had failed them. Calder's Reach had been real. The siege, the surrender, the 70 years of tribute, all of it true. All of it exactly as poor and as spent as the Senate's file described. But Calder's Reach had never been the whole of humanity. Only the part of it the Corvi had been allowed to see up close. Year after year, while the homeworld went dark and stayed dark and was quietly filed under settled. No one had falsified the record. No one had needed to. The Imperium had simply never looked past the one colony it had already beaten, and had mistaken a single defeated outpost for the shape of an entire species in decline. 70 years of patience, on a world no Corvi ship had visited since the surrender, had built what was now sitting in the sky over the Senate's own dome. I watched First Speaker Kale's mouth move and produce nothing. Not panic. Not yet. Just the particular stillness of a man recalculating everything he had been certain of an hour ago. Somewhere above us, fixed and unmoving against the bright daytime sky, the fleet held its position without firing, without broadcasting a demand, without doing anything at all except being exactly as large as it needed to be to make further argument pointless. The accord on the table in front of Kale was still legally binding, still real, still worth exactly as much as it had ever been worth to the one colony it covered. It had simply stopped being the only document that mattered. Voss rose from the petitioner's table at last, unhurried, and looked up once at the shapes through the glass before she looked back at the first speaker. "We signed what you asked us to sign," she said. "We never told you it was everything." She walked out without waiting for a response, and nobody in that chamber for once tried to stop her. I have covered a great many endings to a great many wars in my life, and I have never seen a room go that quiet that fast, in daylight, with nothing broken and no one shouting, just 100 Corvi senators sitting very still under a sky that no longer belonged only to them, doing the arithmetic on 70 years they realized, all at once, they had never actually finished counting.